you said that growing up in a household and in a community where you didn't talk about race was the best possible of circumstances to grow up in.
Hmm.
So, what makes you, because obviously, right now, culturally, right, we're in a moment where people are talking about, oh, like you said, we need to talk about it. Like a lot of people are
Yeah,
pushing talking about it. I'm literally doing a live stream where I'm inviting people like you to come on and talk about it. So, it's
yeah,
now obviously becoming at least a thing that I think anyone who's paying attention will see a lot of people of color want to have us do, particularly black people.
yeah.
And so I guess like has your perspective, I mean, it sounds like you still have that perspective that people growing up not talking about race, not thinking about it, not that is ideal. Is that your still your perspective?
I think so. And I think it's that way for two reasons. I think it's because A, it allowed me to have no preconceived notions about these concepts before I ran into them in the wild. And so maybe this is just like a hindsight bias thing, but I think when I think about my childhood and I kind of ran into bigotry in person, it allowed me to have whatever a more so like neutral approach to the experiences, if that's even like humanly possible, to the extent that you can have a neutral experience, right? So that's the first reason I like that is because then it really tells me like who I am as a person, if that makes sense to me, if it doesn't make sense, what my reasoning is, things like that. The second reason I think is fundamentally more important than that, which is I think I would have turned out a horrible person, personally speaking, if I grew up with people who were bigoted. And the chances of that are not small where I grew up. And so I just, again, that's all literally all hindsight bias, right? But for me, it's just kind of like I could have obviously grown up with people like my friends, and I didn't, you know? So I consider that it's the best possible world where they're going to let me have my experience around this concept and not try to inform me of what should be thought, so to speak.
Okay. That's interesting. So you don't think people should be informed what they should think about the subject of race before they experience race, like in the wild, as you said. And so, like, I, I guess I have a hard time. I mean, like that's not definitely not an option for anyone who's black. So because in the wild, like we experience racism all the time, and so like we can't go be go around. I mean, most black people cannot go around being ignorant of race and racism for very long at all. Most black people experience something in childhood that implies or directly tells them that they are at the bottom of a racial hierarchy and they have to start
Hmm.
making sense of that similarly to what you experienced but you were on the sidelines, right, like kind of like observing. And
Hmm.
so it's a little bit different when you're on the receiving end because it's more connected to your survival instinct. You're not really kind of contemplating, well, who am I, what is my identity, like who am I as a person. It's more like
Hmm.
how do I stay safe? How do I protect myself? How do I walk through this world when I know that people are thinking that I'm less than a human being? What do I now do when I'm forced to interact with these people? And if in fact they treat me as though I'm less than a human being, then I could actually face negative consequences because of that. Physically, financially, emotionally, psychologically,
Yeah.
spiritually, and the consequences can range from nothing to death. So, it's. I feel like for black people, it's really hard to say, oh, like let's just see what happens. Like it's dangerous. It's actually dangerous for us to have that kind of philosophy in reality. And so, do you have anything that's more maybe like universal that could like apply to all of us, maybe in terms of, you know, because and let me just, I don't want, actually I'll just let you answer that and then I'll go on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me at least, what I'm sharing is just my perspective about myself only and not about the greater population or the world, because like I think with just how I'm built as a person, um, it works for me to have less information and then just kind of let experiences happen to me. I'm a little neuroatypical, neurodivergent, or whatever the word is. And so I don't have very strong reactions unless things are particularly obvious, I guess you could say, in some way. For me, I would also say that I I think it's an act of hubris for me to make prescriptions about the world, and it's not me trying to avoid your question. It's more like I don't think I'm quite smart enough to say how we should talk to kids about race, if that makes sense. Like if I
I
were to
mean, you
make like a
did say that
broad,
you think it's ideal that people grow up in an environment where they don't talk about it or think about it.
no, I said it's ideal for me specifically. It was ideal for me, not for
Okay, well, I was trying
everybody,
to
just for
clarify
me.
that. I mean, that was the initial. Okay, so that you were only talking about yourself. You think that
Yeah,
that was an ideal upbringing for you because of
yeah,
your the way
just
that
being
your brain
different.
works.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's all.
okay,
Yeah, because
interesting.
I don't know what's good for the world. I have no clue if, for instance, like in personality psychology, right? There's this standard model of personality, like the five factor model, right? The big five or whatever. Everyone talks about it. And like a kid who's temperamentally way more neurotic than I was might not even be able to handle a simple academic conversation about like race related hate crimes from a parent, no matter what their skin color, ethnicity, background, and so on and so forth, because they're just temperamentally extremely sensitive as a person. And so I think that depending upon like dozens and dozens of variables of which I probably couldn't predict, I wouldn't dare sit here and say, well, this is exactly how we pull out the book and talk about race to kids. Because, like, I think there's and again, this is not a dodge. This is my honest opinion as both a person, just me as a regular person, but also me having done clinical work for a long time now, which is there's so much complexity, right, to a person, even though some of these ideas are more or less simple, I would say. I think racism is a pretty straightforward idea, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. But that being said, the complexity of how you've experienced these things, how you understand the concept of race, and especially like at what age can certain types of kids understand it versus other kids, depending upon how they're built or if they're on the spectrum or if whatever the differences might be. There might be dozens of differences or there might be three differences or there might be zero differences that matter. But I think it's very much like an intersubjective experience. There's like so much complexity. It really matters like what is that particular dyad, that parent-child dyad? What can they really handle with each other? Because it's my experience doing a lot of family therapy in my career. Most parents can't handle shit with their kids. And it's not because they're bad people, it's because they're regular people. And regular people are not experts in their emotions. Regular people have a lot of strong reactions because they're regular flawed people, right? It's very rarely that you have a person who's on the one end of the like normal spectrum who's like two standard deviations and like lack of theory of mind, like a person on the autism spectrum might be, where they don't have strong reactions to a lot of these interpersonal things because they just don't pick up the social cues as much. As just a for instance, right? So because I personally worry more about the parents' inability to understand their emotions than the kids, I think it's like a situation by specific thing. If we could create like a very cool predictive model of like if you're this aware or race conscious and you're this well regulated as a person, you understand your own baggage around race, your own biases, then we can create a prescriptive formula, so to speak, around like how to talk about it. But that's just the way my brain works, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand it. I guess like that just seems like a lot just to like communicate with people about something that's like so pivotal to our existence as humans and like literally impacts us all the time. I just feel like what other thing do we think of when we're thinking about educating people about? Do we ever like hey, why do we need to thread the needle so like perfectly in this instance, like and it's just, you know, for generations education about this subject matter has been suppressed and purposefully suppressed. So like it seems it's always strange to me that people are always finding what the limits on it should be, what the limits on what we should do about race and racism is. That is
Mm,
where a lot of the conversation, especially with racialized white people, that's where the conversation always ends up going and lying. And like, what are the
mm,
limits?
mm.
What boundaries can we draw? Like, what's the minimum direction we could go? You know, I was reading, we're reading Dr. King in the book group for the Contraband Wagon,
Mhm.
and there's this quote about white liberals that he
Uh-huh.
writes. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
the white liberals he was working with, he says, they were looking for an end to brutality. So
Uh-huh.
they not freedom for black people. And he
Right.
realized that, only after winning some victories, right? He thought that we were all on the same page, but then once the brutality ended, he said the
Hmm.
white liberals felt a sense of completion,
Mm.
and black people were like, we're, we're just getting started here. Like, yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, no. And so,
Yeah.
that was just a mere 70 years ago, that he, or less, that he was writing that.
Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
that that dynamic he was describing is kind of somewhat still in play, and that kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about the consequences of a racial hierarchy. It even controls what we think about, how we think about it, what access we have to certain universes of thought, even. I don't think a lot of people think about this subject matter at the level of thought. However, I have thought a lot about it and done a lot
Hmm.
of uh, investigation into it. And so, you being a psychologist, I'm glad that you're here because I'm gonna try and throw some things out and get your opinion, your professional opinion, or someone with knowledge anyway to hear about. What do you think about just the idea itself about a racial hierarchy influencing what universe of thought that we have access to, and based on
Mm.
skin color because of the historical legacy of racialization?
Can I address that and the former thing you said about limitations with response to my comment? Yeah, I think that that's a really cool point that we can spend a lot of time on because I think that there's like 10 or 12 different ways to slice and dice it. So hopefully we can talk for a while on it. I think just in response to my earlier comment, just so you and everyone who's listening is clear, this is how I think about everything with regard to like developmental psychology, which is if you really wanted to be the best middle school teacher and you wanted to be the best choir teacher and you wanted whatever particular topic it is, whether it's race or math or anything, I would want the same kind of like you could call it like regression analysis, statistically speaking, thinking, which is what are the best predictors of someone being able to do this thing, right? Like, are they smart enough? Are they emotionally aware enough? Are they, etc. Right? So I want that to be a universal approach. Like if I had, a MacArthur Genius Grant and I could like create a psychosocial, emotionally centered learning, kind of Montessori on steroids kind of principled school, it would involve, this way of thinking that I described when you asked me about how to talk about race. Like I couldn't make a general universal prescription about like these are the things you say and these are how you say them and these are the ages at which you say them because I think that if we don't factor in just how aware somebody is, right? As just a simple variable, then you might want to approach the topic differently. And that's just to me like statistically informed thinking. And I would want that for every topic, whether it's grammar or math or world history or state history or race or emotions. Like I would apply the same concept of emotion. Some kids don't know anything about their internal world. They don't have much theory of mind whatsoever. And so in some cases, you're kind of beating your head against the wall. Like a kid who's severely on the autism spectrum, they don't care. They don't have the capacity to care because they're just built differently, for instance, right? So I apply that same kind of thinking to everything that I do and to every topic, not just race. I wasn't trying to unfairly limit the concept of race in case that's what you were thinking. I would say that if you're talking to a kid about religion, if you're talking to a kid about politics, if you're talking to a kid about whatever, you might want to think twice about A, your own biases, B, your own emotional well being and your ability to tolerate the topic, and C, whatever the kid can actually handle and how can they handle it. And what are you basing your judgment on that the kid can handle. Because maybe your judgment of what the kid can handle is just about your shit, not about like what the kid can actually handle. In fact, kids are more resilient than you think they are. They can handle complicated topics. The question is, are you looking at all the variables, or are you just looking at the one or two that suit your like your own baggage or your own political worldview? And I think that that's just my general way of thinking, just so everyone knows, so you know it wasn't a specific comment about the topic of race. The second thing, which is a super cool topic, which I have never thought about in my life prior to this conversation, so I'm super stoked because I'm just going to go into who knows what space on it, is I bet you're right in the most general sense. I bet it's incontrovertible, I would imagine, that depending upon what your status is in society, and I think we could slice and dice it more than just race, whether it's gender or sexuality. I think you can include at the, different slices of it, depending upon where you are in, to use a word that some people won't like, the intersectional hierarchy. You might have different access to knowledge. You might have different opinions about knowledge simply because of where you grew up, what group of people you grew up with. And that's not even including the concept of culture yet. That's just including these very like macro sociology concepts like race or age or gender or sexuality, right? And then when you enter in like the various subculture levels of analysis, like, so, what kind of national ethnic origin did your family have, right? And then what kind of mythos, kind of values or belief systems did that mythos come from? So like I have Irish, Scottish, and German in my background. And so it's a myth, but it's like the mythos of is like we can drink, right? And it's like it's a stereotype, but it's a mythos that informs the way that my father and all of us have talked about each other, right? It's the German thing, it's the Irish thing, it's whatever, right? And so I think you can enter that level of analysis in the conversation. And I think we could spend like decades and decades trying to research and predict like who has what access or what belief system about these. Like you could create a predictive formula to figure out who's more likely to believe this, that, and the other based upon like where they grew up, what the mythos is of their family, whatever degree, age has to do with it, gender, sexuality, race. What's really informative to me is the amount of thought that you put into this. And I really appreciate that for one specific reason, which is the thing that I think is exhausting to so many people when we talk about race is what people perceive as simply a reactionary approach to the topic. And I think that it's been my experience talking to you, not only just today, but like in general, that like you're just a very thoughtful person. And it's just to share a reaction with you. It was really disheartening to hear you say that you have like all these degrees and these awards and like they've garnered you really no respect or attention in the world. And that's wildly disappointing. I think anyone who survives like a law degree deserves some extra measure of respect for being able to torture themselves for at least a couple of years and pass a bar exam and all these things, like I think
Well,
universally anyone
no
who
bar passage. I'm not.
oh
I
okay
am not a barred attorney.
okay,
Just a
gotcha, gotcha.
JD. Just a JD.
Well, still, a JD is a big deal. Like very few people actually get an advanced degree on this planet. It's a wild thought to get an advanced degree, even in 2023. And so, like, that's really disheartening to hear. That makes me feel very sad because, like, that's fucked up. And anyone who busts their ass to get even one degree deserves some kind of kudos in the world.
See your reaction there. This is another great. I'm so glad you said that because you said that that's really fucked up, right? When I explain my experience. So
Yeah.
I was at my friend's lake house with her family, racialized white
Uh,
friend. Her family's all racialized white, some Italian immigrants, and there was like the matriarch, and we were hanging out by the pool or whatever, and we're chatting it up. I'm chatting it up with her, and she's like, I love Candace Owens. She's like, she's the best. Oh yeah, she's like, she's like, she's the best. And she's like, if you're black and you're gay, you have all the opportunity in the world, and like just going on and on and on. And I was like, well, that's so interesting you say that because here I am, black and gay, and these are things that have happened. I just start like giving her my life experiences. Listen, man, she was so upset too. She was upset about that, but she was not
really?
upset about what I experienced. She was upset that I was dispelling this illusion that she wanted to believe. She did not care about all of the different like terrible experiences that I was like rattling off to her. She was more angry that I was forcing her to reject her formerly held belief that black gay people had all the opportunities and Candace Owens is a great person.
Sorry.
Don't
Oh,
apologize, bro. But like, it's funny, right? But like when I'd said it to you,
oh,
what was your reaction? Your reaction is like, oh, that's fucked up. But that's not everyone's reaction. You must understand. Like
yeah, yeah,
these are moments that reveal the
yeah.
the lack of like this is like something that's so deeply ingrained in her that she was like struggling. You could like literally watch the conflict in her, like
Oh
just
no.
like struggling to hold on to Candace Owens and like
Oh
I mean
no.
it's hilarious. So like see it's these little moments, bro, that I've been observing over so long. Like I have learned so much. I could go on and on and on. So like I will just keep bringing stuff up as it comes up.
For sure. Yeah, please do. Because, like, that I think is the best way for us to learn in some sense is like, there's the textbook stuff and there's like the statistics and the data, and that tells you a story and it tells you like one level of analysis, right? One of the classes I teach for CLU is the kind of the research synthesis, research methods class for master students. And I always tell them that there's this whole world of qualitative research that exists. Not everything is a randomized controlled trial when it comes to psychotherapy. And like the reason qualitative research matters so much is something I literally tell students for 5 years now. Literally, I've been like, it matters so much because there's just a world of information that you do not know. And although qualitative research never generalizes in a perfect way, neither does quantitative research, it will give you thousands of things to explore in a quantitative way, right? And so that's why I appreciate what you're sharing because like I've never had the experience, just like the gay friends I have, or we're not a big fan of like the Candace Owens approach to anything, to be frank. So I don't think we would have had the same reaction. And the people that I've had the privilege of being able to hang out with and call friends would also have the same that's fucked up reaction. And so I have like a little bubble of people, and it's I know I'm 100% in belief about the fact that you had that experience because I grew up with people who would be like, "What do you mean? Candace Owens is great and she's a truth teller and she's, blah 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 bullshit." And like it's disappointing, but it's also reality in the sense that like there's a lot of people who just love these talking heads who, because of they just have the correct skin color, the correct sexuality, they're like immune to criticism, which is fucking stupid. It's just insane.
I mean, it
It's
was the
like,
emotional component to me that was like more impactful on me because I was like,
yeah,
wow, like you really like I'm staying at your house, like your family's house.
yeah,
Like y'all invited me here and welcomed me into your house. I'm telling you some of my most traumatic, difficult experiences, and you're more angry at the fact that
mm,
I am dispelling your illusion than the fact that I went through these things and that these are my experiences. To me, that is the most telling part, is because
mm,
think about how deep that is.
mm,
How deep does that belief have to get? Why would such a belief get so deep within you? It should give, I hope it gives people a curiosity to question, like, what has this done to us? Like, people need to reflect on what this racial hierarchy has actually done because people don't learn about it. It's nowhere. This information is very scattered. You would have to like go seek it out and find it, and it's still just a small sliver.
mm,
So I just believe that a lot of answers to what we need to do as a solution to the problem actually lie in these unexplored corridors of thought. And, ultimately it would be nice if, I could devote myself totally to, kind of revealing these things. And I have devoted a lot of my life to it. And, I've had many impactful conversations with people who have, you know, agency and power, perhaps, to influence change in our society.
Yeah.
And I know that it can be impactful. But,
Yeah.
you know, ultimately, all I want to do is try to get us more on the same page. Everybody,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
are some facts, there are some realities about race and about racism that virtually nobody knows, and they're critical. If we had knowledge
Mm.
of them, if there was widespread knowledge, then the whole dynamic would change. What we're experiencing now, this BS we're going through right now, where like all of these different people are popping up saying all of these crazy extreme things, some of it like tangentially correct, some of it completely off the wall, and I just want to be clear. I'm not talking about liberal or conservative. I'm not talking about Democrat, Republican. I'm not talking about left or right. This is
Yeah.
happening across the board
Yeah.
because there is widespread ignorance on this subject matter within the species of human beings, within humanity. So you said you grew up in your small town. There were a lot of churches. So I've been to a
Yeah.
lot of small towns in America now, and
Hmm.
there's always a lot of churches, and
Yeah.
and I've also talked to a lot of people who grew up in the church and whatnot, and I've talked about
Uh-huh.
them on this show. I've talked to,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of racialization in churches. Obviously, not yours, as you described. You said they never brought it up, they never talked about it, but
Mm-mm.
apparently it's very common for churches to have conversations about race, and that
Huh.
yeah, and there's a long storied racial history of the intersection of race and religion. I actually did a panel discussion, the intersection of race and religion, and had some different people who have experience with that. And if you go on my YouTube channel, there is a
Yeah.
woman I spoke to. She's the mother of a undergraduate college classmate, and
Hmm.
she worked as a clergywoman in
Hmm.
Native American community, in her own racialized white
Mm.
community, and in a black community.
Yeah.
So she had a lot of different experiences, and so she talked all about it, and about a lot of stuff we've actually talked about already today. So I do recommend it. Her name is wow, Gail Seavey. Gail Seavey. Check her out.
Okay.
But anyways, churches. You didn't experience
Yeah.
any of that, huh? You didn't experience any of the
No.
indoctrination into white supremacy that I've heard about, huh?
I mean, maybe there's stuff I'm not remembering, and I'm perfectly open to being wrong about that. I'm thinking about like the few memories that really stick out to me in my brain about my church growing up. I remember my pastor, his name was Dr. Richard Adams. And so he was like a gentle person. You know what I mean? Just like, that personality type where they're just like soft spoken. He wasn't like one of those fire and brimstone preachers. He was very much like that, kind of like a New Testament focused, like love, tolerance, grace kind of person. You know what I mean? And that was since I was very young to before he unfortunately passed away when I was in my teenage years. That was just kind of who he was. And so most of my memories were about like his sermons, which were very much focused on like being charitable, giving to people, loving people, accepting people, just stuff like that, generally speaking. I know he talked about end times a couple of times, I can recall as a kid, but like it wasn't ever like the, oh, dear God, kind of, fear propaganda kind of way of talking about like other people I've experienced in my life. But then I also look at like my Sunday school experiences. And my Sunday school experiences were other white kids, racialized white kids, as you would say. And like they literally, um, we only really talked about like essentially, I think we talked about the New Testament most of my Sunday school experiences. I don't remember talking as much about the Old Testament. And
That's
then,
the same for me, by the way. Like in Sunday school, like mostly it was like New Testament as
yeah,
well. Yeah.
yeah, I think that may be more of like a Baptist thing in some ways. I could be wrong about that. That's not definitely not my discipline at
Yeah.
all.
No. Correct. Yeah.
Um, And then The other experience I had that was really formative as a kid is my dad really liked um, King Solomon, and he really liked what was that book? It's escaping me. Proverbs. And so a lot of my thinking as a kid was really focused on the concept and the concepts that show up in Proverbs, right? Which I don't recall because it's been a while since I've looked at Proverbs, but I don't recall much about anything related to race in Proverbs, if
Yeah,
I'm
I
remembering
don't think
correctly.
so. If yeah, I don't
Yeah,
believe so either. So yeah, okay. So that's
those are
yeah,
just my experiences.
yeah. No, it's good to hear. It's good to hear that like it's not like some kind of universal like thing in churches where people are like pushing white supremacy from the pulpit because a lot apparently that's like a pretty common thing. And
Hmm.
also I want to do live events, right? And so
Yeah,
I want to, churches was one of the venues I was hoping would want to kind of create space for these kinds of conversations to occur, right?
yeah.
Bridging the gap again. And so when I was talking to people about it and other people working in this space, talking to clergymen, people who are in charge of churches, and they were like basically telling me that white pastors didn't want to open up their churches to that because they were afraid of losing their
Yeah,
parishioners. And I was
yeah,
like, okay, but like, what? Like, isn't this your job? Kind of like to like make that difficult choice. Isn't that like what you preach about? Like, isn't that like? I was just like, wait a minute, like
yeah,
the hypocrisy there. Like, come on, like it's too
yeah,
much.
yeah. Yeah, it's
So
wild. I mean, that's what, dude, that's why I wrote a book about fear because like I think it's this universal conversation killer and it kills the concept of love and compassion. It kills everything, I think. I think it's useful and obviously in limited circumstances, but like, man, I think it corrupts us.
it definitely does, and it's a powerful force, like but I don't know, man. People got to overcome their fears, and like, I, speaking of fear, like
Yeah.
a lot of these fears, right? Somebody wrote in the comments, "Is it fear or conditioning?" That's exactly where I'm going because, like,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
because ultimately, I'll tell you something that I've experienced a lot is like
Yeah.
when I bring up race, like obviously people's
Uh,
fear manifests, and there's a lot of
yeah,
fear,
yeah,
especially among racialized white people. And there's
yeah,
one reaction that I can literally create this reaction, which is like people freeze. They physically can't speak, they can't
yeah,
move, like literally like full scale paralysis for like a short time. But like
yeah,
I have created that moment many times just by what I told you before, pushing people into a universe of thought in this context that they never considered or knew existed, and
yeah,
and then implicating race, and then not even saying anything about race, just implicating it. I don't have to even mention race, and then
yeah,
just and it's crazy. It's a physical response where
yeah.
they're like I'm threatening their life. I remember one specific time. Okay, I'll tell you
Oh
about this one
no.
story.
Oh
So
no. Should I get more alcohol?
yeah, yes, you should. We'll both go get some in just a second. Here, after this question,
Okay.
we'll get a refill.
Okay.
But
Okay.
um, so longtime friend of mine. I went to middle school and high school with a racialized white woman and
Uh-huh.
her brother. I grew up like staying at her house. Like I know her whole family. Like we grew up together.
Yeah.
Like this and that. We were in band together. All this stuff. Her little brother, like I've known him since he was a young kid. He's now an adult. He's a lawyer. This and that. So I've seen
Uh-huh.
him through all the years. We've interacted many times. I'm sitting in my friend's house. We're chatting it up with this brother, and she had mentioned to me before we encountered him that he was getting kind of red pilled, as they say, from the internet. And she was noticing he was becoming more misogynistic and more racist. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna like investigate this. Like this guy knows me. Like whatever. Like he's like we've been like I've literally known him since he was a child.
Yeah.
So I literally was just like, I literally asked him the following question. I said, "Hey, so what do you think about black people?"
Oh no.
Literally, the fear on his face
Oh
It
no.
it it was like I was trying to kill him. Literally, it was that level of fear. Like he was afraid that I was gonna reach over and just strangle him to death. Like that
Oh
is the level it
no.
was at. And so it's crazy to observe something like that because I'm just like, it's the same thing where a lot of people are like, oh, nobody likes being called racist. Nobody likes being called racist. I'm like, I don't care if somebody calls me racist. I literally don't care at all. I have no emotional reaction to somebody calling me racist. But a lot of racialized white people believe it's some universal fear that people have. I'm like, no, most racialized black people do not care if you call them racist because we know we're not racist. Or we know we are have racist. Everyone does something racist at some time or another. We all have biases and like this and that, but we're not worried about it,
Yeah.
manifesting or anything like that. We're not concerned
Yeah.
about it in any way.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't care if someone calls us racist, but so many racialized white people have told me like, oh yeah, nobody likes this. It's horrible. And like, it's like, no, like people have called me racist many times and I've never once had an emotional reaction to it at all. Like, I don't care. So yeah, it's just these divides,
Uh,
bro. Like it's
oh
they're
man.
they're very it leaves for a very interesting experience to walk around having this. There's another one. I'll tell you one more, and then we'll get our refill. So
Okay, okay, for sure.
I'm at a um, bachelor party with 21 other
Okay.
guys in an Airbnb
Okay.
in Nashville. And
Okay.
most of the guys were in the frat together. I was not in a frat with this guy. Went to law school with him, same guy. And we're all there. I took a bunch of the guys, everything's going smoothly. I took a bunch of the guys to get some supplies. We bring back food, we bring back drinks, stuff that we need. And we're just hanging out. We're playing some beer pong on the outdoor patio and whatnot. And I'm sitting down waiting for my turn. And this guy sits next to me. And he says, so you're just hanging out with us or what? Like, like literally, literally. So you're just hanging out with us or what? Like he's like, I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, you're the building manager, right? Like he's like, like I've already met like basically everyone. I've been here just with everyone else. Like I literally helped get the supplies just with a bunch of other people. Like
Wow.
I was one of the first people there. My friend like greeted me. I mean, like there's all kinds of different signals. So I said no, that I wasn't the building manager. It was as if I didn't say a single thing. He literally
Oh
still
no.
implied that I was the building manager after I told him no. So this story has a
Jesus.
continuation. There's a lot of parts. So the next part is I literally just end up getting up and walking away because I was like, okay, well, I don't know what to do now since I already answered. So I then sit next to someone else, start talking to him, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna bring up to this guy what just happened. I just decided I'm just gonna bring
Mm,
it up and tell him. I was like, hey,
mm,
so I was sitting over there and this happened. And the next thing he said was something completely unrelated, like not even remotely related to what I told him. Like as if we were starting in the middle of a conversation, a totally different conversation. Now I could understand what he said and I could continue the conversation from that point, but it had absolutely nothing to do with what I told him. So
wow.
that was part number 2. Part number 3. I then about 10 minutes later, this same guy is is talking with a group of like 3 other guys. I walk up and I was like, "Hey, so remember when we were talking over there what I told you?" And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "What do you think about that?" He literally could not speak. He could not move. He could
Mm,
not answer. And like
yeah.
everybody was laughing because because they were like, what is happening? He literally was paralyzed. And so
Oh no.
it's just and then later that night, I'm sitting in a group of 4. We're in a huge like house and there's a big open space. It's very echoey and boomy and
Mm,
loud, right? So you don't have
yeah.
to speak very we're just like there were only 4 of us in the house at this time. Everyone else went out in the city. And we were just
Yeah.
kind of hanging out talking. And I told the story of what happened. And I asked another guy, these are all different people. I asked another guy what he thought of it. And he literally leaned in and was like, "It seems racist." He literally whispered, like we were just talking regularly, and he just like whispered that, and we were all
Yeah,
I was just like, why are you whispering? I was like,
I
why are you
love it.
whispering, bro? The
I
fear,
love that.
the
I love
palpable
it.
fear, the way it manifests, it's hilarious, and it is not something that is universal. It's part of the consequences of what has been done under the tenets of a racial hierarchy. And there's so much, bro. We could go on. I could go on and on and on. There's so much. And that is the real nature of the problem that we don't really talk about, is this
Yeah,
divide. It's not an imaginary divide. It's a real
yeah,
divide that has to be bridged like brick by brick. And
yeah,
we also have to do it while it's still in full force. And so it's very difficult. But like we're never going to get there if we don't like look at the problem the way it actually exists. And right now I think that we're not even remote. We're like barely scratching the surface of that in any way. So
yeah. I would definitely agree, and that is it's having talked to you now for an hour and a half or whatever. It's not surprising, unfortunately. However, it's like, good God, man, like just have a conversation. It's really not complicated. Yeah, just have the reaction I had. That's fucking stupid. I can't believe he did that. It's not magical. But I think there's just a truckload of fear, and it sounds like you've just had these incessant experiences of people not being able to manage their fear or just understand their reaction
yeah,
in
they
the
can't.
slightest.
And like the one guy who called me the building manager, he then approached me later and tried to say that someone else told him that. He
Oh
just, but he
no.
made that up. I was like, bro,
Oh
like,
no.
I was like, I was like, wow,
Trying to
like
save
you
face.
can't just
Yeah.
say I'm sorry and like we can't move on. We can't just like move on from like what happened. You can't acknowledge it at all. Like so
Damn.
it's just it's very interesting, man. Like like living in a world where people are living with that kind of fear and acting on
Hmm.
that kind of fear.
Hmm.
I mean, that's why I'm in the posture that I'm in. It's literally the reason why these degrees, these awards, these accolades that I've gathered. It's people are too fearful to let me
Yeah.
lead, to let me be in a position of authority, to let me actually like present the things that I know, the things that I've learned. Like I mean, if it helps people, if it helps them, then they'll listen. But otherwise, no. If they can't perceive that it helps them, forget it.
Well, I'm actually really curious, if you don't mind, like what was what was your expectation, if anything, about how this would go after our kind of 30-minute chat? Did you have any assumptions about where we would go, or based upon like I think the one
No.
thing that stood out to me about our first chat was you're like, oh, this is going to be good, is kind of your reaction, I think, because I don't remember the exact words, so if you've got the quote in your brain, go
Yeah,
for
yeah,
it. But
yeah.
for
I
me,
remember what happened. So
I
I'll
was
tell you
like,
what happened, and I'll tell you what
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
about it now. So like,
yeah,
what happened
yeah,
during our pre-interview conversation is I said you were an outlier in the way that you said something about race, and what you said was that you have no moral obligation to talk about it. And
yeah,
it was your directness in like saying that statement that I was like, wow, like this guy doesn't have the same kind of reservations, like the same kind of fears that I
yeah,
often experience with people, like people who are
yeah,
even educated a lot sometimes on this topic. Like, you just didn't exhibit it. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, the reason I said it's going to be good is because I was like, exactly what you said, which is that you're not going to be inhibited. You're going to be open. You're going to talk about it. You're not going to get
yeah,
emotional. You're not going to like, so we can have a kind of conversation that I don't normally have, right? Where I don't need to think about
yeah,
regulating emotions or like, not
yeah,
pushing people too far or not stepping on anyone's toes or like this or that. Like, I could just
yeah.
talk and I could tell you things. And it was your curiosity. You also have a strong curiosity.
Hmm.
And so I recognize that as well. So I was like, that will give me an opportunity to talk about some of the things that I did about universes of thought and fissures there. The thing that I think is like ultimately holds the key to fixing this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate you, brother. And it I didn't have any expectations except for like knowing that like that formula makes for a good mixture. That's it.
I think so. Yeah. I think that when people can be curious and not have at least any impairing degree of fear, they can probably get somewhere. And like, I don't know, it's been my experience, especially like doing podcasts and stuff for the last 5 or 6 years, that like there's a lot of fun to be had when you talk to people you've never met before. And I can't imagine walking into a conversation like, yeah, we're talking about something very contentious and it's got lots of emotions and there's good reason to be afraid and blah, 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 blah. But like, my God, it's Friday night. Why are you not going to have some fun? As stupid and simple as that sounds, it's like, why are we not going to have fun with each other? I don't get that.
Bro,
I
I
do
mean,
not
some
get
of the
that.
best conversations on race I've had are over the fifth drink at a bar. Like, you know, like I mean,
Yeah.
this is a way of life for me. You know, like to me, this is
Yeah.
not a situational like, oh, you got to find the right time. No, I've had these
No.
conversations quite literally everywhere, and so like, yeah, like I'm always trying to squeeze every last drop out of life, bro. We only get one life. You know, we only get
Yeah.
one shot at this stuff, you know? So like I'm always
Yeah.
trying to maximize and optimize and I'm trying to live my values. One thing I wrote on Twitter recently is that like I'm realizing that's not how people live. Like
No.
a lot of people are not living their values like whatsoever. Like they just
Mm-mm.
like kind of professing
Mm-mm.
values but not actually like
Yeah.
living by them. I have always lived by my values. Like since I was a young child, like I told you, I recognized my values and so
Yeah.
I like honored them because to me it's important to do that. It you know it solidifies your identity. It solidifies your place in
Hmm.
the world, you know, and like it makes decision making easier and it makes you less
Hmm.
fearful because
Yeah.
like you know it's easier to know what you will do in any given situation. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I know because like you've done the same thing and you like explained it, you know, in a different way earlier. So um
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think we're very similar in that regard,
Yeah.
which is super cool because, like, one of the reasons, just for whatever it's worth to anyone who ends up being curious about me, one of the reasons why I've always worked in addiction treatment, other than growing up with somebody in recovery, is because it's the only segment of the clinical psychology world where, like, a values-based approach to things is a way of life. Right? Because when you're just treating OCD, you don't really talk about spiritual principles in the AA sense, right? And so, like, I essentially have always stuck around kind of AA focused treatment centers in my career because essentially, if I don't have other people who talk about values on a regular basis, I'm probably fucked, is my experience. Because with my, ego and shit, I'm liable to think and do whatever crazy shit without other
It's your
people who are
leash,
more
huh?
grounded than me. Yeah, yeah, I need a leash because I'm insane. You know what I mean?
I actually really do know what you mean. Yes, I sure do. I feel like we would have such a blast together. You would be hanging out. Oh my god. We would be trouble, brother. We would be real trouble.
Probably. We'd
Oh
say
yeah,
crazy things
100%.
and people
I'm
would be
certain.
uncomfortable around us.
Oh yeah. Wow. Well, I really appreciate you giving me your time, man, and being willing to have this conversation. Anyone who comes on here, but you know, we've been talking on Twitter back and forth like for a while now, and
Yeah.
that you made the leap. I'm proud of you, and I appreciate you. You know, your conversation tonight, at least for me personally as an individual, was extremely valuable. So I appreciate you on that level. And then I also just want to, you know, give you your flowers, bro, and say like, you know, thanks for doing your part to to show people that it's okay, like to do this and to spread the message that like not only is it okay, but maybe you should do it, you know, like and think about that. So thanks.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think this is super cool and I really appreciate you having me on and allowing me to share my experience and being an equally or more curious person than myself. That's super fun for me, because those are the people that I was kind of raised around. And so, like, it's always fun. And you know, I don't have the same approach as you, but I think we're trying to do similar things because my main shtick is like how primitive we are and talking about fear and stuff. So we're definitely coming at a lot of the same problems, including race, the same way. Like I would talk about it more like divides, right? Like we're coming at the divide problem, with different concepts. And so I think that there's only gain or profit to be made when we talk to each other, right? I think we need more conversation, not less, even with the people who disgust us. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there's there's room to talk to people who even have like moral positions that really just make us feel gross. And I think that sunlight really is the best disinfectant. And so these kinds of conversations give me some space to figure out with like, where do I need some more sunlight too, you know?
Same, brother. And that's one of the best things about these conversations is that it, like you said, it gives you new avenues to explore. And both of us are curious, so we'll do that work and we'll both continue growing. And I hope
Yeah,
the rest of you guys watching this do the same, guys. Like, never stop growing, never stop being curious about this world filled with infinite mysteries to us. Okay, like so, please join me in that exploration on race. And thank you for joining me again, Dr. Lockwood. Appreciate you, brother. And I'll see you in the
likewise.
Twitter streets, bro.